on today's StoryBeat.
To understand the difference between art and commerce. So once when you're writing a piece of art, right? It's your artistic side. But when it comes to whether you're self-publishing or whether you're traditionally publishing, it comes to looking at it as a product that needs to be sold.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Damyanti Biswas, is a Singapore-based fiction writer. Her short fiction has been published at Smokelong, Ambit, Litro, and Puerto del Sol, among others. And she's the co-editor of The Forge literary magazine. Her popular blog, DamyantiWrites.com, where she speaks about the writing life and interviews publishing professionals, turned 15 this year. She's the author of You Beneath Your Skin, an Amazon best-selling crime novel, which has been optioned for screens by Endemol Shine. Her next crime novel, The Blue Bar, was published by Thomas & Mercer USA. It received a starred review from Publishers Weekly. Goodreads named it one of 2023's most anticipated mysteries and thrillers. The sequel, The Blue Monsoon, is out now and receiving positive buzz from readers. I've read both The Blue Bar and The Blue Monsoon and can tell you both books are exciting, beautifully written modern mystery crime thrillers set in the dark side of Mumbai, India, which makes the reading all the more fascinating and compelling. So for all those reasons and many more, it's my distinct privilege to welcome the brilliant novelist Damyanti Biswas to StoryBeat today. Damyanti, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And I'm so glad that you invited me here. It's a privilege.
Oh, the privilege is mine, that is for sure. So let's go back in time a little bit. What caused you, of all things, to focus on as a writer, the notion of crime stories, mystery stories? Where did that come from?
I fell into it, really. I began life as a literary writer. And as you can see, I'm still on the board of a literary magazine, which is The Forge. So they do literary short stories, very, very different from crime. And what really happened was I started writing a literary story and it kept growing. And then I took on a mentorship. I won a mentorship from somebody from the Birkbeck University in the UK, and she was the head of the MA program. And while mentoring me, she was like, Damyanti, what sort of novel do you think you're writing? So I said, I'm writing a literary novel. And she said, well, you have an investigator, you have a series of crimes, you have clues. Don't you think it's a crime novel? And I was very disappointed in myself. At that time, I was one of those writers who, when you begin, you have a lot of snobbishness in you, which is given by all your reading, because if you've read very widely and if you've read all the Booker Prize winners, you keep thinking, that's the only kind of writing worth aspiring for. And I was actually quite disappointed and got entirely blocked for 6 months. I couldn't proceed on the novel. And then I said, well, this is the story that I need to write because it just wouldn't stop. So I kind of continued and I became a crime novelist. Definitely not by design.
That's amazing because you're a natural at it. And I think that the world is better off for you writing crime novels than trying to write literary novels, which, by the way, you can still do. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, right?
Well, let's hope so. Writing a literary novel is an entirely different beast than writing a genre novel.
What a great thing to talk about. What is the difference between a literary novel and a crime novel?
Well, the difference, I think, is small, but makes a huge impact, because I think a literary novel is kind of designed to make you think. So it's not concerned with entertaining you. It's not concerned with you at all. It's concerned with itself. A literary novel is entirely focused on itself, and whether you understand it or whether you enjoy it is not its concern at all. Whereas a genre novel, a crime novel, is something that the reader is coming to with a different set of expectations. They expect to be transported, they expect not to think, so which is just the opposite. You can make the reader think even in a crime novel, which is what has happened in mine, because it does have that literary aspect to it where I do raise questions, but you can't do it at the expense of pace, let's say, or that escape that we are talking about. So yeah, I mean, the reader expectations are very different for a literary novel and a crime novel.
That is for sure. The reader expectations are quite different. And I was curious what you thought the differences were. And I think that's a fairly good explanation. Were you always a writer when you were a little girl? Did you think about books and writing when you were young?
I did not. I mean, I read a lot. To me, writers were not real people. I never thought of writers as somebody real. I thought books were just written and somebody wrote them and you just printed them. And, I thought of them as like printers, because I grew up in a small Dust Bowl town in India where we didn't really have libraries, where books were very limited. I was very fortunate because my dad was an avid reader. I come from a really underprivileged family where we sometimes had to make the choice between, the budget for food and the budget for books, which led to a certain amount of conflict, let's say. But I did end up reading a lot, but I never ever imagined I'd be a writer, because that's a foreign thing, right? I mean, who's a writer? And then you grow up in a family where you have these financial restrictions. You try to get into a profession that pays you, and from the very outset I knew writing, it was not on my radar. And then I got married. I moved from India to Singapore, and I was a fashion designer in India, and I
Oh,
was jobless in Malaysia. And to get a work permit, there were certain issues. I had to go back, etc., etc. And I had my husband, who's been very kind and very supportive throughout. And he said, well, he'd read this book by Thomas Friedman called The World is Flat. And he said, well, this guy says anybody can do anything from anywhere. These were the beginning days of, the concept of globalization was, somebody'd written a book about it at that time. And I said, okay, why not? So then he got me a laptop. It was a secondhand laptop and it had two keys missing. I think it was somebody's IBM ThinkPad, and it had the keys I and Y missing. And I was like, okay, copy paste from the internet. And I wrote this article about, I don't know, something gardening, whatever. I don't even remember what it was about. And I was paid the princely sum of $20 US. And I was like, okay, I got it made.
with the I and the Y missing, you can't even put your own name on it.
No. But that's where I started with my writing. And if not for my husband, I mean, very clearly I wouldn't be a writer today. And I'm not even embarrassed to admit it, because that's the truth.
Did you get training anywhere for writing, or did you just start to write?
Well, I did go for workshops, in the sense that I went for tiny writing workshops in Malaysia. And then when somebody from the UK would come in, I would go for their workshops. And that's how I got the mentorship with Birkbeck. So it's mostly been online. The offline ones have usually been like somebody from Curtis Brown coming down to Singapore. I was very fortunate with having those people coming down here, and they would usually have like a competition where people would kind of apply, like, I don't know, 500 people would apply, and 10 or 15 would get chosen. So by a stroke of luck, I kind of got into those. And then being at the Forge, which is not just a literary magazine, but the Forge is also a group of writers, and all these writers, they are published like in some of the best venues. So, reading and writing with them kind of helped me improve my writing. And I also took a lot of online classes. So I had Literary Actor, where I took tons of classes on plotting, characterization, all kinds of things.
Did you realize at some point that you actually had the skills and ability to not only be a writer, but a published writer? When did that happen for you, or how did that happen for you?
Well, that again is another story, because I was writing You Beneath Your Skin, which was my first published novel. You Beneath Your Skin, I began in 2011, and I think around 2016, I went to the UK. And I was taking a few workshops here and there. And at each workshop, they tell me, "Do you have an agent?" And I'm like, "No, I don't think I'm ready for one." And they're like, would you like me to introduce you to one?" And like that. And I was like, I mean, who would say no, right? I mean, you'd be really naive to say no. I was naive, but I didn't say no. I just said, okay, yeah. And I was introduced to a few. And then when I was introduced to a few, I used to read a lot of blogs, and I kind of said, well, it's not simple getting an agent. So I started querying alongside. So as soon as I got an offer from, somebody who I was introduced to, I kind of told everybody else, "Hey, listen, I have an offer." And that's when I realized, okay, I am publishable, because I got like 4 agent offers. And I picked one of them. And I was like, okay, that means if an agent thinks they can sell what I'm writing, that means probably I can write a novel.
I would say
I couldn't
that's a
really.
really good clue, is when somebody in the professional world says, "I can do something with your work." That's usually a
Yeah.
clue that you're actually fairly good at it. What for you, I ask lots of authors this question, and I'm fascinated to hear your answer. What for you makes a good story good? Why is this story a good story, but other stories you would abandon or not write? What makes it good for you?
Well, as a reader, it's a different thing. But as an author, when I look at a novel, I would like to, first of all, see if it interests me, because by now, if it doesn't interest me, I have to read the same. Are we allowed to curse? We're not.
Yes, you can curse on this show.
Okay, so the same damn book 75 million times, right? And so if you hate the subject, if it's already boring for you, then you're going to hate it even worse. Like, by the time I'm done with my book, I never want to read it again. When people ask me to read, at these readings and stuff like that, or at podcast interviews like this, they're like, "Would you like to read an excerpt?" And inside me, I go, "No." But outside, I'm like, "Sure." so yeah, so it shouldn't be boring. It shouldn't bore me at the outset. It should really grip me. It should be something that I really want to write more about. I should wake up in the morning and say, okay, what about this, what about this, like, should I, what happens here, what happens here. So that's like my first clue. And the second is, sometimes when I'm writing nowadays, I write from an outline, because if you're selling professionally, you have to give them something. I might
Yes.
veer off from that. So when I write the outline and I find that the story doesn't, I could finish it off in a short story, that's another clue. Okay, this is not going to work in a novel, this is not going to go the distance. So these are the only 2 things really that I use right now. This might change, but right now, these are the only 2 clues that I pick up. And then out of that, I would give my agent like 10 premises, and my agent would pick 2. And then again, she would say, "Write 10 more." And I would write 10 more premises. And out of all of that, we would kind of pick 5. Maybe I would have written 30 premises. She'd pick 5, out of which my editor would probably pick 1 and say, "Write more." I'm basically outlining the process of the Blue Monsoon to you. That's what happened.
So it was a process of delivery and elimination until everybody was on board and happy with, this is the story you should be writing.
Yes, because it's a marriage between art and commerce, right?
Yes, it is. So do you think that when you're already thinking about a new story, do you have some clue early on that, yes, this is really going to work? Or do you have to work at it a long time before you're convinced it really does work?
Well, it's both really. Sometimes I know immediately this is going to work. This is something that's, oh, this has legs, and then I might just mash it with another idea. But sometimes an idea just grips hold of you. And I trust myself as a reader as well, because I read pretty widely. So I know that if it interests me, chances are that, it's not going to be completely uninteresting for other people. And then I, of course, also go out and see what else is out there, who's written a similar thing. So
Well, sure.
I, yeah,
And,
so
and
I
one of the hallmarks of your books, the two that I read, the Blue Bar and the Blue Monsoon, they're chock full of conflict and action. You're very good at writing action, and your stories are filled with conflict, which is exactly why people are gripped by them. And are you thinking that through? Is that intentional on your part, or is that just coming out that way?
Well, the first draft doesn't have as much conflict, but there's one thing I do to set up the conflict at the very outset, which I think is the fuel that kind of propels my book, is that I kind of try to figure out who my main character is. And once I know who the main character is, and if they are fascinating enough, then I figure out what it is that they want in life. What are their external wants? What is it that what's their goal? So, like, let's say they want to get married, they want to solve this case, they want to, win the lottery, something externally. And then what is it inside of them, inside their mental makeup, that's kind of stopping them from getting there? So as the novel progresses, there is the want of the protagonist. Protagonist wants something, and then something's stopping him. So what's stopping him is also external, of course. Maybe there's an antagonist, maybe the circumstances, maybe there's a tsunami, we don't know, but there are a lot of forces that go against him. But one of the biggest forces that go against him is within himself or herself. So within herself, if she has a certain weakness, a certain wound, a certain belief about herself, like, oh, I don't deserve this, like, she wants to win the lottery, but inside of her, she's so convinced that she doesn't deserve it, that she probably doesn't go and buy a ticket. I mean, I'm just simplifying it, right?
As screenwriters, we call that a flaw. That's a
Yeah,
character's
yeah.
flaw.
Yeah, so I do that a fair bit. And once there is this thing set up between what they want, what they need, and why they're not getting it, the rest of it is like, scene by scene. Later, I go into the draft, and scene by scene, I see whether there's conflict or not. But there has to be that, very seminal conflict right in there. And if that's not built into your log line, and you do this in your screenwriting,
We
if
do.
that conflict is not baked into your log line, then the conflict is difficult to generate. I mean, you can have surface conflict, and somebody punch somebody, but it just doesn't have that heft that you need. The story doesn't have that heft. You can add those punches later, like scene per scene, whatever happens, you add in your red herrings or whatever it is, but the internal conflict has to be strong. And
There's
if you don't,
nothing like a really powerful internal conflict. That is for
yeah.
certain. So describe a little bit, what are the stories of the Blue Bar and the Blue Monsoon? What the stories are more or less about, your characters. What is the story about?
So the Blue Bar, it's gritty, glamorous Mumbai. There is a dynamic police inspector who is in love with a feisty bar dancer, and neither of them know that they are being stalked by the same serial predator. So that's what the Blue Bar is about.
Okay.
And the Blue Monsoon is about the same police inspector who is trying to save the city and his wife, who's wheelchair bound. And in order to do both, he has to solve a set of serial killings. So both involve serial killers. They're serial
And
procedurals.
I have to assume, and I'm going to ask you, are you planning to write more blue books?
Well, yes, I already have the outline for the third blue book. Let's see what happens.
And you're going to continue the theme of using the word blue in the titles?
Well, that's rather up to the publisher, really, because the titles, the author really doesn't have as much control. But my publisher was very kind. They kind of had a back and forth. Me, the blue was the title remained, like that was my original title. The Blue Monsoon, we kind of went with a variety of titles before we came to the Blue Monsoon. I knew that rain had to be part of it, and then I kind of thought blue had to be part of it, and we were like blue rain, blue this, blue that, and then finally it became the Blue Monsoon, because I also ended up googling, the title, and a lot of titles had books before, and I find that very annoying. I do not want my books to have this title, which is pretty possible sometimes.
As you probably know, you can't copyright a title. You can trademark a title, but you can't copyright a title, which is why so many titles appear repeatedly in movies and TV shows and books, because you can't protect it. I think that these stories that I read would make outstanding movies or even a TV series or two. Do you have a thought like that in mind? Are you thinking about, if someone were to come to you and offer you a movie deal, would you be interested in that kind of thing?
Oh, why not? I mean, I do have a screen agent. So yes,
Well, I
I
think,
do have a screen agent in Hollywood who would like it. So any offers coming my way, I just send it to my literary agent who sends it to my screen
well,
agent.
I think they would make terrific movies or a series, as I say. How do you know so much about police procedure?
I didn't really. I actually went and interviewed people. It actually began with You Beneath Your Skin, which was my first novel, where I learned how to conduct interviews. So by the time I was writing The Blue Bar, I kind of, in Mumbai, I kind of went through connections, friends of friends of friends, and somehow landed up in a police station, actually watched how policemen work, actually showed my plot line to a police person. I combed through a whole lot of the newspapers. So the newspaper clippings, if you see in the Blue Bar and in the Blue Monsoon, that's simply because I read a lot, and they are very, very boring two-line accounts. But as you could see, they are, and I put them in that voice, which say very little, but sometimes if you read in between the lines, you learn a fair amount. So I kind of get, they send the viscera for this. So I start furiously then reading about viscera and what happens, blah, blah, blah. And what happens, blah, blah, blah. And in India, the challenge is not just about the crime and catching the criminal. It's also the challenge of the resources. We are a country of more than a billion. We're the most populous country in the world. Mumbai or Delhi are some of the most populous cities in the world, and they are also cities where people come in and come out. So it's not a city which is constant, so it's forever pulsating. So every morning the population of the city grows, and every evening it shrinks. So all of these kind of add to the challenge, and I've kind of made that very much a part of. So I've not sanitized anything when I write about postmortems and things like that. I actually spoke to somebody who conducts these postmortems, and most of the times they don't do it themselves. They get somebody who's not trained in medicine at all to make a cut and take these things out, the organs, and they just kind of treat the human body like you would at a slaughterhouse. Not all places where they do postmortems, but a huge majority. So yeah, I mean, I kind of made those a part of the novel. I asked questions. I didn't know so much about police procedure or forensics.
So you're then a deep researcher, both in literature, et cetera, and also in terms of interviewing people and getting right in the thick of it, so to speak. Is that something that requires a lot of planning, and do you have to spend a lot of time figuring stuff out before you even can begin to construct the novel?
Well, for me, I kind of do a lot of research through reading. I mean, Singapore has some of the best libraries in the world, so it's very well stocked. And nowadays, with Google, I think we have the kind of advantage for research that if you know how to do the right, you know the right keywords, you know how to figure out, what's what, you can read papers, and you can get enough to kind of make the skeleton of a book. But then to fill in the details, you do need to go out there and speak with people. And I find that there's no replacement for that. I mean, somebody who tells you, these little details, which can, it's like it creates that likeness of the book. Because if the reader believes that one of your details, is right, or it's striking, and they remember it, then they tend to trust you. And once a reader trusts you, then you can lead them wherever you want. I mean, then you can, put your red herrings, and the reader would be like nodding away and saying, yeah, 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 this is what it is. So in a way, you have to earn the trust of the reader. And then at the end, you kind of do the payoff, so that the trust pays off. But yeah, I mean, research is, to me, you have to do things which earn the reader trust.
Do you
Really,
also
to me,
read a lot of mystery and crime novels?
I do, yes, I do. And I kind of try and keep up with what's coming out next. Nowadays, I even blurb other authors so I can read. I mean, that becomes part of the task. So I hardly ever say no to people who ask me for a blurb. If I can, read it, I will read it and see if I can, because everything teaches me something. Each new book I read teaches me something.
Well, that's
So
true. I have to kind of assume you've spent a lot of time in Mumbai as well, yes?
yes, I have. I mean, a long time back, I interned there, so I spent time there. And for the Blue Bar, I spent quite a fair bit of time there.
How many languages do you speak?
Uh, Two Indian languages, the Hindi and Bengali, which is my native language.
And what do you write in? Do you write in English?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have, my school was an English medium school, so we were taught everything in English. So English is almost the first language I use, because I was never really taught my native tongue. Because if you grow up in an underprivileged family, you're told, you need to get a job. And in India, which was a colonized country, and our minds, which have been colonized over 200 years, we,
Yeah.
we were taught that English is a better language instead of just another language. So, even now, learning English and knowing English is considered a virtue. So yeah, I mean, you almost can't help it.
Well, you write as if you had been born in America. If I didn't know what your name was and I hadn't seen a picture of you, I'm not sure I would have known you were anything but an American.
Well, a lot of it was faking it, because when
Faking.
I first had my conversation with my agent, because I do write well. I mean, that I know.
Very.
But a lot of my writing is UK English writing, because that's the schooling. Because after India was colonized, a whole lot of Britishism. I mean, the first books I read were British. I mean, I grew up on British books. I mean, I did read some Enid Blyton as well, like things like that. So we grew up on those books. We didn't grow up on I read very few books written by Indians when I was a child. So I only read either books in English which were English. So I was reading Shakespeare when I was 13 or 14 years old.
My
I was reading
goodness.
Bernard Shaw when I was 16. No, I was lucky because I had my dad who kind of, bought those books. And then I was reading all the Russians in translation. I was reading Emile Zola. I was reading, Bohe. So I was reading magic realism. So I was reading all of that. So I did not read in anything but English till the time I think I was 18, when I taught myself my own native tongue, because my parents were not interested.
You
They were
taught
like,
yourself your own native tongue?
I had to, because the writing of it and the reading of it. I still cannot write in my native tongue.
Huh.
I can read in it. I'm fluent in reading it. I'm fluent in speaking it, but I cannot write in my native tongue, because I was never taught that. So I do write better English than I write my own language.
You write extremely excellent English.
Yes, a lot of the Americanisms, sorry, is from courtesy my agent, because I told my agent, I said, very clearly, I'm a brown writer writing about brown people for a white audience. You are a white person. And this was exactly the conversation. You are a white person, so you must translate brown into white so that they get it and they get a flavor of what brown is like, but in a language which is more accessible to a white reader, simply because I'm writing a thriller. I'm not writing a literary novel. If I was writing a literary novel, I wouldn't have bothered because the audience is different. They are much more, they are more concerned with meaning and thought and all of those things. So they are not bothered by a little bit of a, hiccup in language. But if you're writing in the genre, then people want to be entertained. They're not as keen on understanding meaning and language. So you have to make it very, very easy for them. And even then, for the first book, I didn't have a glossary, etc. And that got me a lot of reviews saying we don't get it. And in the second book, I have the glossary as a result. There's a list of characters and there's a glossary and there are author notes and there are explanations. And as a consequence, a lot of people appreciated that because they were like, I wish I'd known, I would have done it for the Blue Bar as well.
There was a little bit that as I was reading that I didn't know what you were talking about, and then I would find the glossary and then I'd get it, but not much. I thought you wrote in a way that was translatable to anyone who didn't know anything about Indian culture, didn't know anything about Indian language. I thought that was very good the way that you did it. So let's talk for a moment about the development of each story. Where do you begin? Is it you come up with a character thought? Is it a plot? Is it some scene in your head? Where do things usually start for you?
Well, the Blue Bar started with a workshop exercise where somebody said, write about somebody who is being watched, but they don't know they're being watched. And then Tara kind of walked into the screen for me, and I saw her at a crowded railway station wearing a fantastic blue sequin sari, looking stunning amid all the sweaty crowd, the rush hour crowd. And I was like, who's this woman and why is she wearing this sari? And then who's watching her? And why does she have to leave within 3 minutes? So that first chapter is in fact it's a vignette. It was an attempt at a flash fiction. And then I sent it to my then agent and in the UK, and he was like, oh, this is interesting. Why don't you look into it? And I looked into it and it became a novel, became The Blue Bar. For The Blue Monsoon, of course, there were a lot of heads other than mine, which kind of were part of the creative process. But the beginnings were, I heard from my yoga teacher of all people, who said that there were people who come by in his street to buy hair. And I was like, buy hair? What would you mean? And he's like, yeah, when you comb your hair, you get some hair, you have some hair fall. So if you keep that hair and you keep storing it in a packet, my wife just sold a packet of hair for a dozen teaspoons. And I was like, really? And, I didn't know. So I kind of went in and I immediately began researching, saying, what about this hair? Where, what, how? And then I realized that India is the world's biggest exporter of virgin hair, which means the untreated hair, right? Hair which has not been chemically treated. So, and that kind of started off the Blue Monsoon for me. And yeah, that's where the idea came from.
Well, it's very, very interesting. It seems to me the way that you've expressed that things just come to you. Are you actively trying to find new ideas in your mind, or do you just let them come?
A bit of both. I mean, I do try to find the ideas, but they are usually in my old notebooks. So I kind of used to write I sometimes do even now, but I used to write a whole lot by hand, and I have like an entire cupboard full, and that's like a 4 feet tall cupboard, which is entirely stocked with my handwritten
Oh,
notebooks.
wow.
So
Wow.
they're chock full. So sometimes when I'm like looking for ideas, I'll kind of look at my own pages and then something comes out, because I did write a lot of flash fiction. And the thing with flash is you have to fit in a lot within a page. So you could fit in a novel within a page. I mean, I could, if I had to. I mean, I could write an entire story, as in I could indicate it in 200 words. I could do an entire life.
Really?
And yeah, I have. And that's something that then is like a mini outline, right? And then I can just use it.
What's your technique for developing characters? Do you do a lot of preparation on a character, or do you just let them flow too?
No. Characters, the when the character comes on screen, I'm a very visual writer, so I can
Yes,
see
you
it,
are.
I can smell it, so I get like a full, five senses experience when I am seeing something. I can actually, it's like a complete hallucination. I just need to write it down. So when that happens, that's when I know that I need to ask questions. And then I do write a lot of questions. So before I write an outline, I spend weeks doing what I call pre-writing. So I would write about the character before the character comes on the screen of the novel. So before they enter the first page, we all come, there are certain things that shape us. So, nature and nurture. So certain things are by nature, but what happened due to the nurture? So the entire background. So I would write about them when they are like 5 years old, when they are 12 years old, when they are 17 years old, depending on, what are the events that are shaping them, what happens to them. And I don't just write one line, I write entire scenes. So fully fleshed out scenes as if they would be in my novels. And I send these out sometimes as, every month I send out a short story for my readers. So it's usually those. So I don't really have to write new ones because those are my pre-writing. So if you subscribe to my newsletter, you would find a lot of backstories of the people in my novels. So you get an explanation, a detailed explanation of who's what. So I do that. And this is even for my minor characters.
So you're deep into it before you even start to write the novel itself. You know who these people are.
I have to, otherwise I cannot write the novel because I would usually finish the draft in a month. So the Blue Bar, I wrote the 90,000 words in a month.
Wow.
But yes, I did.
That's
I just
fast.
I wrote it. But the thing is, I knew who Arnav and Tara were by that time. And it was not the final draft. That took another like 7 or 8 drafts. But
Is that typical for you? 7 to 10 drafts, somewhere in there? Is that normal?
well, the Blue Monsoon had the least amount of drafts because I wrote it in less than 1 year, from conception to editing to everything. It killed me almost because I was like, oh God. But yeah, the first novel took 15 drafts. You Beneath Your Skin took 15, and I rewrote them. So, I mean, I changed points of view, the narrative points of view. So it was in first person, then it was in, 3 people, then 5 people, then 2 people, then back to 5 people. So then obviously, that means a rewrite, right? So I did that. With the Blue Bar, there were 6 or 7. And by the time it went to my editor, she was like, oh, this is a very polished manuscript, and this won't take too long. And that was the editorial call. And then she sent me an edit letter, and she's like, this is the shortest edit letter I've ever written. It's just 3 pages. It isn't much. All you have to do is take the first 1/4, chop it up, take it out, and then feed it into the rest of the novel. So
Nothing to it.
yeah, it wasn't much. So yeah, so we did that.
Well, I was very glad to hear you say that you've visualized things very well, that you're a visually oriented writer. Me too. In all the writing I've done, I think of it as a movie playing in my head. That's how I see it. And then I think of myself as a reporter reporting from the field as to what I see. Is it similar for you?
Absolutely. I think of it as kind of taking dictation, like the words and everything, they come to me. So I can't write till I write. And that's why it's hard for me to write, to dictate when I'm writing. Like a lot of writers are able to dictate, but for me, each word leads to the next word, to the next word. So I find that I can actually think that it's coming from a different place. So dictation and writing come from different places. So I can dictate an email or a blog maybe, but to dictate a novel is very, very hard.
How difficult is it to develop a love story, a really believable, good love story in the middle of a bloody murder mystery?
The love story was really not intentional. It was part of Arnav's story. It was part of Tara's story. So when Tara came on the screen in the first line, in the first page, when she comes in wearing the sari and who's watching her, my first thing was, maybe it's the guy who loves her, and he is watching her. Maybe he's actually a stalker, and maybe he's the villain, etc., etc., etc. And then from there, I was like, no, 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 no. And then that line came in that, somebody makes her heart beat faster. And I was like, no, 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 that's not that guy. And somehow I knew that it wasn't the villain. So I said, who is it? So Arnav actually came from Tara. And once Arnav and Tara came in, I was like, oh, what is their story? And that's how the whole thing happened. I really didn't intend for it to be, any kind of love story.
So the characters, classically, writers talk about getting to a point where the characters begin to take over and speak to you, and you're just sort of interpreting what the characters are telling you. Does that happen for you?
Once I've done my pre-writing, yes, because by the time I've done my pre-writing, I know these people a fair bit, like almost as well as I know my husband. No one can know anybody else entirely. They
Sure.
will surprise you. After 20 years of marriage, somebody could surprise you. But I know at least that much. So the character is still capable of surprising me. And I think I'd let them do it because to me, what is the character telling me what to do? It's a part of my subconscious, right? And my subconscious is so much more, it's powerful. And I trust it. I trust my subconscious. I trust my instincts, because really they haven't really led me wrong. So I kind of feel the more I trust it, the stronger it becomes, is how I look at it.
What would you say are the common errors that young novice novelists make that prevent them from making a sale? Can you think of anything that they ought to do differently or think differently?
Well, it's so hard to, you know, I would say it's not correct to make a correlation between the errors made and the sales not made.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you make no errors and you still make no sales because, of the list the editors already, the agent already has, or the editor already has, and they already have something in mind, and or their vision of the market is different. So sometimes people kill themselves kind of looking for validation from publishing, saying, I'm not good enough because nobody could sell me. But that's really not true, because art and commerce are very different. You could have written a very good story, but and even though I'm a traditionally published author, I go on to say that sometimes editors don't see it till they see it. I mean, you hear so much about an author who never sold, and then, I mean, there were people who rejected J.K. Rowling, right? I mean, she wasn't,
Sure.
11 people rejected her before the 12th person was persuaded by his daughter to pick it up, right? That's what
Yes.
the legend is. So the thing is, I think this does a lot of damage to writers, equating being published with being good. I'm not saying everybody who's published is bad. I'm simply saying that, what is saleable at a certain moment of time may not be saleable at another moment. So, if you took a book from 25 years ago, which was an international bestseller, number one, you try and sell it today, it'll not sell.
It's
Like nobody.
timing.
Yeah. So it's a lot of, people ignore the role of luck and timing. So that for sure. Yeah. If you look at errors, I would say not knowing enough the market. So you need to know what's out there and what's being, you have to kind of be clued in to what agents are looking for. So look at all the MSWL lists, look at, interact with authors nowadays with Twitter, kind of diminishing, get into Slacks, get into Discords, like connect, network. So if you don't network enough, you don't know what's going on and what's what. And, you follow certain people, you figure out what is going on in the publishing industry, you read the publisher's marketplace, you figure out what is selling, who's selling it. And the way I found my current agent was to actually go and see what's selling and see who has sold stuff which is closer to what I write, and then look at those agents and query those agents. So, work your way back instead of just blindly going in. And it's all about strategizing.
So you actually do a great deal of thinking about how you're going to approach whatever it is you're approaching, the market, publishers, et cetera. You're strategizing that out. Is that right?
Well, I have no choice. I'm a brown author sitting in Singapore trying to get published in the US. So I know I'm quite aware of what I've taken on. So I know that I have to work 4 times as much to get one-fourth the distance that somebody would get if they are in the US. And let's be straight, if they're a white author. And it's not changed. If you look at the data, it's still not changed. Publishing is still overwhelmingly white, and we are making a lot of noise, which kind of leads people to believe that it's a change, everything has changed, and now is the white authors who are struggling to get published. But the fact is, everyone's struggling to get published, and non-white authors are struggling hard.
Authors have struggled from the beginning of time.
Millennia,
Yeah.
because it's economics, right? The supply is much higher than demand at
Sure.
any point of time. So whenever the supply is higher, then obviously it's not the seller's market, is it? It's the buyer's market.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
yeah.
So most writing, most publishing comes with a certain amount of pressure, usually personal pressure. To finish, you may be on a deadline, which is an imposed kind of pressure, et cetera. When you have pressure on you, whether it's from yourself or from someone else or some other thing, do you have any tricks or techniques for handling that pressure? What do you do?
I happen to be the sort of person who kind of thrives under pressure, because I
Oh,
think that's the kind of thing I grew up with. You grew up in a smaller household with limited resources. You do kind of grow up to be one of those stringy, tougher kids, right? And who do have to, if you have to survive, you have to kind of thrive under pressure. So for me, I suppose I have that training since childhood, but on a day-to-day basis, what I try to do is I try to just say, okay, let's not look at the whole thing. Let's look at what's the easiest thing I can do. What is it that I can get off my list the fastest? And then I do a few, and then that kind of makes me feel like, okay, I can do a little bit. So I kind of hack at it, hack at it, hack at it. I try and actually put my head in the sand. I don't look at the whole thing. I don't look at the entire pile of things I have to do. I have a long list, and then I just, keep ticking just the smallest one off the list. And actually, it's all about inertia, right? So you have the inertia of rest, so you stay in rest. So the idea is to get me into the inertia of motion. So once I'm in the inertia of motion, I start getting things done, so stress reduces.
is that a difficult thing on some days to get that inertia going?
Oh, it's almost impossible. And I talk about it a lot on my social media. I'm always there complaining how I can't do things. And it's not because I'm a whinger by nature, which maybe a little bit I am, my husband will tell you. But it's also because I think the writing process and the writing life is glamorized to an extreme by movies. Sorry, Steve. But
You're correct. That's quite okay.
but it's true. So people kind of think that all you have to do is go to a coffee shop and drink some fancy coffee, and then suddenly you write this entire manuscript in a matter of months, and then you have a
Yeah.
friend who introduces you to an agent who suddenly gives you $1 million deal, and then you go on these book tours and you have your life made, and then you find your true love, etc., etc. But I really like to keep the process de-glamorized, because we are in publishing, we kind of feel that everybody knows what goes on within it, but actually no one does. It's very insular. Even some of my best friends don't really know what goes on in my life, and it's almost impossible to explain, because unless you're in the process, you don't know what's going on. So
Most writing is you in a room alone. That's my experience has been is me in a room alone. I assume it's the same for you.
yes, it is. And sometimes it is not, because sometimes it's my agent in the room with me, metaphorically. or my editor in the room, because when you're writing genre fiction for traditional publication, yes. But also I think a lot of writing nowadays is also you have written it, but then you're also involved in the selling of it necessarily, especially if you're in self-publishing. So writing is not just writing, unfortunately. I wish we could all just stay in one room and do nothing else, but especially if you're self-publishing, you do have to do a lot. And nowadays, even if you're traditionally publishing, you have to do a lot. So
Do you have ways that you can stay disciplined once you've gotten that inertia going, or does the inertia take care of itself until you're just too tired to go on?
oh, well, yes, I need discipline in kind of remembering to eat and sleep. So that's where my husband comes in. I'm not very disciplined. He reminds me that I need to eat, and he reminds me that I need to sleep. Once I'm in motion, it's difficult for me to stop.
Do you get into what I and others will call the zone, where time just flies by and it's hours later and you realize that you've just been lost in that zone? Does that happen for you?
Well, it happens to me mostly when I'm on social media, but we'll not talk about that. But not time suck, but no, I'm joking. But yeah, in writing sometimes, especially when I'm getting to the end of the novel, I'm not fortunate enough for that to happen every day. I'm the sort of writer who has to kind of struggle, especially I think because now that I read myself, I feel like I my subconscious is convinced that something you've not struggled for is not worth the win. So I'm trying to change that, because that's my mindset. That's what I've grown up with. But now I know that it's possible for things to come easy to you, because your subconscious has already done the math. You just have to trust it and go ahead with it. So yeah, no, for me, I'm not one of those writers who finds joy in the process of writing and stuff like that. I'm one of those writers who has to write, who's kind of compelled to write and must write. It's like, when you were a kid, you would fall down and you would get like some sort of a scar, and it's not healed over, it's not become a scar yet. And you keep picking at it. You shouldn't pick at it, but you pick at it. But you shouldn't pick at it, but you pick at it. You can't stop. That's what writing is for me. It's not a very pretty metaphor, but that's exactly what it is for
So
me.
you're a writer that picks at the ideas and picks at the ideas, and they
No,
just keep
I
coming out
pick it myself, I think. I
at
pick it
yourself.
myself till it hurts. It's not pleasant. It hurts. It's not nice, but I can't help it. So I do write. I mean, there have been times when I've said to my husband, I'm not writing another word. I'm stopping here now. I'm done. And he just laughs.
Because the
So
next day it's already working on
yeah,
your
I'm
mind.
up at
Yeah.
dawn. I'm up at dawn doing something about it.
I am having the most marvelous conversation with Damyanti Biswas. She's been on the scene for just a short while in terms of novels, and I highly recommend that if you like crime and mystery novels, that you certainly go out and find both The Blue Bar and The Blue Monsoon. I think you'll enjoy them as much as I did. So I'm wondering, in all of your experiences, are you able to share with us a story that's either weird, quirky, offbeat, strange, or maybe just plain funny?
Thank you for the shout out, first of all.
Oh, my
Steve,
pleasure.
it's very, very kind of you. One of the things that happened to me quite recently, in fact, was I met someone, and they were like, I really, and I can't tell you which part they liked, but they liked a certain part of the novel, and they liked a certain character, and they fell in love with that character, and they went on telling me about it. And I was like, uh-huh. And it was actually based on them. I
Oh,
didn't tell them that.
oh,
And
wow.
I had changed the gender and the age and whatever. But yeah, they didn't know. They had no clue that that's why they were liking the characters so much,
They like
because it was
themselves.
they were themselves. It was them, but I didn't tell them.
Oh, that's very funny. That's very, do you
So I was
base
like, internally, I was like smiling, but I was on the face of it. I was like, thank you. Yeah, very nice.
do you find yourself basing characters on people you know?
Well, I guess we all do, but in my case, I kind of take one characteristic from someone, another from someone else. So, for example, if it's a villain, for sure I give them characteristics that I have myself or someone else has, which, I really like. So then I'll not be so judgmental about the villain, and I'll not like kind of hate him throughout, because that's not my job. So I do that. And then if it's the protagonist, I would give them either one of my annoying characteristics or an annoying thing that someone else has who I do not like, you know. So then the hero doesn't become like this, ooh, everything is good sort of a person. So yeah, I do, but I take bits and pieces of people. I don't take somebody wholesale and put them in. But this was a very minor role. The person who kind of really liked this minor character, this was a very minor role, and it was entirely them in that half a page.
I think that's brilliant. So, last question for you today, Damyanti. You've already given us all kinds of wonderful pieces of advice along the way, but I'm wondering if you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you like to give to those who are starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to the next level.
Well, I think one of the most important things, and I've touched upon this a bit just now, but to understand the difference between art and commerce. So once when you're writing a piece of art, right? It's your artistic side. But when it comes to whether you're self-publishing or whether you're traditionally publishing, it comes to looking at it as a product that needs to be sold. So a lot of people ask me, which do you prefer? Traditional publishing or self-publishing, and people would say, since you're traditionally published, you would definitely want to go that way. And I would say, no, I would say, look at your work. So, traditional publication, at least now, these days, the last 10 or 15 years, has been bestseller driven. So they are targeting an audience who reads, let's say, 5 books a year, and all the way to an audience who reads, like, let's say, 30, 50 books a year. Whereas, self-publishing is niche driven. They are targeting somebody who's, reading in that particular niche. So it could be like, let's say something like I heard the other day, dragon romance, or, prehistoric romance, or whatever it is. It's very, very specialized and niche. And that's what that reader is looking for. And they are reading 300 books a year. They're reading 2 books or 3 books a day sometimes. And those are the people that you can only target through self-publishing, because traditional publishing will not publish something like that, because you have a smaller audience, but they are buying a lot more books, which can keep you, the person, as an entrepreneur, happy, but it will not make Penguin Random House happy. So you need to figure out where exactly your book falls in the spectrum of things. So is it niche? Does it have the potential to be a bestseller, in the sense that, is it something that would appeal to a much wider audience? And there's nothing wrong with either. There's nothing wrong with traditional publication. Oh, there's a lot wrong with traditional publication. But there's nothing wrong with self-publishing. So it's like, you have to figure out what it is that you want, right? Like, what's your goal? What kind of, so if you are in self-publishing, that you will not be going into the same kind of award situations, or you're not going to be, it's going to be a struggle to get into libraries and bookstores. That struggle is reducing these days, but it's still more of a struggle. So, you need to know what it is you're trying to do, how much money you want to make, how much money do you have to invest. So like, for someone like me who didn't really want to invest a lot of money into it, traditional publication was a lot more intuitive. Plus, I write very complex, very wide spectrum kind of novels. So it's not as if these novels would have done so very well for a niche audience. Maybe after I've got my own audience, after a certain number of years, I'll definitely, consider self-publication. But so you need to know what your book is. You can't just kind of take it through a cookie cutter process saying, it worked for this person, it worked for that person, so it'll work for me. No, because every story is unique, every storyteller is unique, and you need to figure out who exactly your audience is and strategize from the very beginning, and look at it exactly like a business person would.
That is fantastic advice especially for young artists who usually don't understand the business end of the business. Whatever the business is in the arts, it doesn't matter whether you're a novelist, a screenwriter, a dancer, it doesn't matter. If you don't understand the business end of the business, it can be very difficult to succeed. And so I think that that's tremendous advice. Now, I'm curious, if you are a writer and you aren't sure what your niche is or what it is that you do, is it helpful to then give it to others and let them tell you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you cannot decide what your work is by yourself because you're not the target audience. The target audience is the target audience. So you need to figure out who those people are simply by trial and error. And it's not going to happen overnight. No self-publishing success has happened overnight. No traditional publishing success has happened overnight. Maybe a few seem to have, but you would see that somebody who is becoming a bestseller at 24 has been writing since they were 10 and probably has been clued in by a variety of factors, has gone to such a school or has had a certain number of privileges. There's something. So the math has to add up. So you have to kind of make that effort from the very beginning to show your work to as many people as possible in the least annoying way possible, with the least amount of entitlement and the most amount of humility going in, and try and see if you can get feedback on your work. And the best way to do it is to offer, to just read. I mean, that's really the best way. In publishing, I think the more you are willing to give free labor in terms of just reading or volunteering or what have you, the more people will be willing to kind of take a look at your work. So if you are, if you have a local writing organization, show up, volunteer, usher, do whatever it is that you have to do to make some connections, because if you make those connections, then you'll be, people will be more open to reading your work instead of just showing up somewhere and just saying, here's my manuscript. Can you just read it and give me feedback? And that's happened to me. A lot of people just show up and say, can you just give me a blurb? And I don't know them from Adam. And, I'm struggling with my own life, my own workload. And in the middle of it, who would I pay more attention to? Somebody with whom I have some sort of connection, because, publishing is run by humans and we are all struggling, underpaid, mostly frustrated humans. So you have to show your work, but do it, put in a lot of work yourself. Show other people that you're willing to help out, that you're a good literary citizen, and then publishing becomes very welcoming of you. If you go in without entitlement, I mean, that's really personally been my experience.
Oh, such excellent advice. Damyanti Biswas, this has been just a fantastic hour plus on StoryBeat, and I cannot thank you enough. And I wish you all the success and luck in the world with The Blue Bar, The Blue Monsoon, and every book that you write after that. So I thank you mightily for being on the show with me today.
Thank you so much, Steve, for having me. And the pleasure is mutual. I'm so happy that I got to talk to you. It's it's always a delight to talk about the writing process. I enjoy doing that, and there's very few people I can do it with. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.